I hope you're enjoying the Grandmounds as much as we're enjoying putting them on. And we appreciate all you do. So I don't want to stand in the way of you and the gaining of good knowledge and our latest updates. Brett, did you have anything to add?
No, ma'am. Welcome to Grand Rounds, and we've got a good presentation for you tonight, and welcome.
Back to you, Dr. King.
Thank you very much. Okay, next slide, Dr. Frazier. So we will talk at the end about how to claim CME, but the first and most important point is if you don't have your full first and last name, we will not send you a CME certificate. So please get that changed. We will post at the end, we'll post the email address where you send your request for your CMA certificate. As part of our accreditation, all of our speakers sign a disclosure of any prohibited relationships. And so this is our declaration that none of our speakers have any prohibited relationships to disclose. So this is being recorded for posting later for you to watch or for others to watch. So we will not show any participants, but if you have a problem with the recording, you should probably drop off now. Next slide. These are the objectives that we're going to cover. So the topics that we're going to cover for tonight, you can read those for yourself. We'll give you just a second. And we'll go ahead and get started with the first speaker.
So the first thing that we're going to talk about is updates to infectious disease. And the first one just has to do with the COVID disposition table. The only change is in row A. Previously in row A, you had to report whether or not the pilot had COVID since their last exam. Now you only need to report it if they had ICU care or if they have long COVID syndrome. So row A, you only need to report it, or you no longer need to report it if it resolved without any complications. So again, row B stays the same. And then row C is the long COVID, post-COVID syndrome. Make sure that you identify what that problem was, and then we'll need information on that. Endocrinology. One of the AMEs, I think it might have been the Grand Rounds last time, caught that the prediabetes worksheet was missing the GLP-1. So on the Khaki for weight loss management, we already had the GLP on. So all we did is coordinate so that the Khaki for prediabetes and the Khaki for weight loss management match. Remember, there's a 72-hour observation time after a dose change. Regarding psychiatry, this is just consistency. There's no policy change. This is just consistency from last month. We have a document in the AME guide that's called General Information for Pilots and Air Traffic Controllers. One is about fast track. One is about the regular track if they need an ADHD evaluation. You can use it for pilots. You can use it for air traffic controllers. What you're looking at on the screen is the first clip of this page. It's really a general information checklist for pilots or air traffic controllers so they will know what documents they need to bring and what's going to be expected. Previously, we had a fast track ADHD statement that said if you have depression or anxiety, you cannot use the ADHD fast track. Since anxiety and depression or related conditions have been updated, if you have a pilot who will qualify for fast track for ADHD and they qualify for fast track anxiety, depression, or related conditions, those can go ahead and be used together. So anxiety, depression, or related conditions does not make someone ineligible for fast track for ADHD. We had already updated this on many of the other documents. So this is not a change. We've been doing this for 2 or 3 months. We just had to get it on all of the documents. Again, in the disposition table, and remember, anytime you're doing a medical certification case, look at the dispo table first. Start at the dispo table before you even go to the Khaki. And on the dispo table, we're trying to hyperlink information that you may need. So the fast track general information for pilots and air traffic controllers, you can reach from the dispo table. So one of the admin questions that we get is, what are these status summaries and why do you have them in the AME guide and what are we supposed to do with them? So how you use a status summary, Remember, a status summary was developed to bridge the gap between what does a pilot or air traffic controller need to know to bring, what do you as an AME need to know to do, what do the million private physicians, your colleagues who don't know about the FAA, what do they need to help us collect data on or help us get information on? And then how does the FAA use all of this information? That's really what the logic behind a status summary is. Instead of having to read through 5 pages of electronic medical records and still not really get the information we need, a status summary is the 5 or 6 specific questions we need about a condition to help us make a safety assessment. So status summaries are usually specific to a condition. They're usually completed by the treating physician. Sometimes there'll be ones that the AME does. These you want to sign and date, or the treating physician needs to sign and date. Many of them will have an AME actions section at the bottom of the page, and that's just your instructions. Once you have this, here's what you do. The idea of the status summary is, in a lot of cases, it can replace a progress note, just like we talked about. That way you don't have to read through a 5-page EMR of things that have been duplicated 4 times. It's really just the information that we need. So another way that you can use a status summary when we've developed them. A status summary, a lot of them were developed to go with special issuance or an AASI, but there are some, and as we develop them, we're trying to match them with the Khaki, so that if somebody does Khaki qualify, they could bring you the status summary, and you could make sure that all of the items meet the Khaki worksheet criteria. In the previous episode, somebody said, why don't you get the Khaki to do the same thing as the status summary? And what I asked them is, send me a template. What would that look like? So at the very end, Dr. Hattrup's going to give you the AME box email. If you guys have a way we can put that information on a Khaki so there's only 1 page, let us know. But right now, status summaries, when we develop them, they can be used for SI, AASI, and in some cases, they can be used for a Khaki. Documentation is the same. If you don't need to submit the documentation for the Khaki because they are Khaki qualified, you just keep it. If they require a special issuance, if you use the status summary as that information, you have to upload it. One sentence that we have at the bottom of many of the status summaries says it will shorten the FAA review time. The way it shortens FAA review time is we have all the information we need in one place. Some of them, like the one for deep brain stimulator, doesn't have a left-hand, right-hand matrix. It's just really the data that we need to make the decision. Remember to have the treating provider sign and date. In some cases, we'll specify what type of provider we need. So for deep brain stimulator, we want a neurologist. The other thing that we've done with the status summaries is this left-hand, right-hand matrix. So if everything falls into the left-hand category, in some cases, you may be able to issue either an initial or research. That information will all be at the bottom of the page. So the example that you see on your screen right now is for AFib. So if somebody is a pilot with an initial diagnosis of AFib, we're going to ask for the status summary, but we also need the records that document how the AFib was diagnosed and worked up. For initial, you'll have to defer, but if your pilot is given a special issuance, AASI or SI, what they will get for follow-up requirements is this status summary. And part of the reason is if they are on an AASI, if everything falls into the left-hand category, the instructions at the bottom are going to say, you, the AME, can issue the follow-up. So that's how we use the left-hand, right-hand status summary options. And again, these are just the instructions at the bottom, and it'll tell you, AME, first time through, you have to defer. If they have an AASI, you have a status summary, everything's in the left-hand column, you can issue. And again, the goal of status summaries was to help everybody not have to weed through pages and pages of electronic medical records, but to ask those specific questions that we need answered to make the safety decision. Some of those decisions are made at the FAA, and some of those can be made in your office. And with that, we'll take questions at at the end, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hatrip, who's going to talk about the section on English proficiency.
Okay, well, good evening. As mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about English proficiency and what the requirements are from a medical standpoint. And the reason for this is the question came up at CAMA, which was a meeting held that the FAA participated in about a month ago. Next slide, please. So the short version is proficiency in English is not a medical requirement. Let me repeat that. There is not a medical requirement that someone understand English or be able to speak English. It is a flight standards requirement, though. So as you know, or may know, we actually have deaf pilots that are out there that we do certify after an appropriate evaluation and approval, and they receive the appropriate limitation on their medical certificate. And sometimes they get something on the pilot certificate too. But we do need to talk about what you do if someone comes in who does not speak good English. So next slide, please. So your concern is to make sure that you can get a decent history from the individual. So as long as you can do that, then you are allowed to issue the medical. Now, we would encourage, but not require you to notify the local flight standards district office, FSDO, that there is a problem here because this does fall in their bailiwick. They actually do have specific regulations on that, which we'll get to that at the next slide. And they have specific testing that they can do to determine if someone meets the minimum standards for aviation English. It's a specific test they have and a specific level that is required to be met. Now, sometimes you may find yourself in the position where someone shows up and they have uploaded the information, done Med Express, but you have not yet opened the examination, so it doesn't belong to you at this point. At that time, you have a lot of options. You can direct them to find an AME who perhaps speaks their language. You have the option, if you choose, to try to get an interpreter. That would be entirely up to you. We would recommend that you not open up the physical knowing this and then proceed to defer. That's not really doing the individual a favor. However, if you have already opened up the medical and now you have to take action on it and discover at that time that the individual really just does not have the command of English and there's no other way for you to get a decent history, then you have basically two options. One would be to defer, as we mentioned earlier, or if you want to hold on to the medical for the standard 14 days or up to 14 days, then you can attempt to get an interpreter. And really, this would be the pilot's responsibility and see if you can complete it. That would be your call, depending on how quickly you can get it, and frankly, just how easy it's going to be for you. Next slide. As I mentioned, the regulations are covered for the flight standards folks, and they are there for pilots. And it doesn't matter what kind of a pilot you are, whether you start off as a student or even airline transport, they're covered in Part 61. There are a number of different regulations that go down. They're also covered for flight engineers, navigators, and for air traffic controllers. We're going to update the slide because we just confirmed the regulation for air traffic controllers, but all of them are required to have English proficiency as well. Now, this is something that the CFI and the examiners verify, both at the initial intake into aviation. You need to make sure that someone understands English before you can turn them loose to talk on a radio, for example. But then also the the DPE, which is a designated pilot examiner, or an ASI, aviation safety inspector. The latter is a FAA employee. Also are required to attest that someone has adequate English capability, and that is done formally on the Form 8710. Now, the 8710 is the form that is used to apply for practical test standards. It's also the form that is used for getting your student pilot's license. So this happens at a very early stage in a pilot's career. There are a couple areas that also require English, and those would be, if you see them, look to the bottom of the slide. For example, sport pilots have that requirement, although you're unlikely to see them because they can fly with a driver's license. It would also be a requirement for people operating a UAV. but you aren't going to see people operating under Part 107 for that. They don't require a medical. But the thing that we really want you to take home is that you need to get a history. English proficiency is not a medical requirement, but it is a requirement for them to exercise their pilot certificate or to even obtain a pilot certificate for that matter. So if you have concerns with that, we are not the appropriate people to raise it with because it doesn't belong to medical. But we would encourage you, if you're able, to reach out to the local FSDO and raise your concerns with them, and they can take appropriate action. And that kind of completes my presentation on this. Barring questions, can we go to the next slide? So this is just a reminder that we are always looking for suggestions. You're the folks that are using the AME guides. So if you see things that need improvement, please send them to us and we will incorporate that as we are able to. I will introduce Stephanie Robinson, and she is going to cover some of the common issues that we encounter that we would like you to be aware of. And with that, next slide, and Stephanie, you're on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hatrick. Good evening. I'm Stephanie Robinson. I currently work as a legal instruments examiner and supervisor for the Aerospace Medical Certification Division in Oklahoma City. I work with the group of examiners that review a large portion of the applications that you transmit to the FAA. I wanted to share that the examiners, physicians, and all of AAM really appreciate the valuable work that the AMEs do, and thank you for the excellent performance reviewing the pilot's medical history and, when necessary, deferring those exams to our office. I was asked to present some best practices and reminders about ways that you, the aviation medical examiner, can help the FAA be more efficient in our review, more precise in pinpointing the correct information that we need from the pilots, and provide a better service ultimately to our stakeholders and make the accurate certification decisions. Next slide. So the items we're going to discuss this evening include the best practices for AME comments, a couple of reminders on time limitations for certificates, common problems we find in medical documentation, some general reminders about Khaki, and some brief comments about document upload. Next slide. So starting out with the AME comments, we find often that the pilot will list their medications, but they won't tell you or us why they're using a specific medication. And since so many medications can treat multiple conditions, knowing the diagnosis helps us be more precise in our request. If you can add details regarding the condition or diagnosis, that really helps us out. So here we have an example where the pilot has reported on their application that they use Lunesta, Depakote, and Abilify. And then the AME clarifies for us that they use Lunesta occasionally for insomnia and does not use within 30 hours of flying. Depakote is used daily for seizures, and Abilify is used daily for bipolar. So, we know this pilot is probably getting a deferral and can use their Lunesta anytime they want, because it will be a little while before we get them certified. But knowing this information really helps us pinpoint the correct information to request from the pilot. Next slide. So this is in regards to item 18, including the date of any medical history or diagnosis really helps us determine the right steps to take. Often the pilot will just report the medical condition. Here in 18G, the pilot reports that they had a heart attack, but the AME helps us out here and they tell us that it was in July of 24 with a stent placement. That helps us understand that they have already met a recovery period. Another time that dates really help us out are in item 18V when a pilot reports a history of DUI. The AME, on the other hand, clarifies for us and tells us that this was in 1994 and there have been no legal troubles since that time. In a case like this, we'd be able to just warn for that if they were otherwise qualified, and we wouldn't have to write out for additional documentation on it. Another place is if a pilot's condition has resolved, including the date that treatment was completed helps us out, or approximate date. So in this case, the pilot lists colon cancer. The AME tells us that they completed chemo in January of 2015 and there's no evidence of disease. So again, if this pilot is otherwise qualified, we're only going to warn for that, knowing that they're outside of that 5-year time frame that we look at. Next slide. All right. Anytime you defer an exam to the FAA, please always include the reason. We see cases deferred to our office and the pilot didn't list any medications. They marked no to everything in item 18. They met all the vision, hearing, blood pressure standards on the exam itself, but the AME deferred the case to us without any notes. So this usually requires that we have to call your office, send letters to you or the pilot to determine why the case was deferred. So including information under additional AME comments about why you're deferring the case will eliminate several steps, and we'll be able to request the correct information from the pilot at the beginning of our review. Next slide. If you've called and talked to anybody at AMCD in Oklahoma City or any of the regional offices, you probably hear us say, oh yes, put it in item 60, make that comment in item 60. So I just wanted to share this slide that shows you all the outlined areas. Those all come up in item 60 when we look at it in our system. So getting your information into any of those areas will put it in item 60 for us. Next slide. All right. So moving on to certificate. If a pilot is on special issuance authorization and you determine that a certificate can be issued again, it does need a not valid after date. So typically, most of the authorizations that we send out are for 12 months. Of course, we know the antidepressant and drug and alcohol authorizations are frequently 6-month time limitations, but you can always confirm this time limitation on the authorization letter. You can put this in 2 different places. The first one is from page 3 in AMCS. You can select limitation number 76, not valid for any class after, and then fill in the expiration date. And if you do this from the quick cert print page in AMCS, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the limitations, you'll see the listing there for not valid for any class after, and you can add the date there as well. You guys are aware we request a lot of medical documentation from pilots, and there's some ways you can help us out. If you're talking to a pilot, one great reminder is to always have them verify if they're getting documentation from their primary care provider or another provider. Verify the medications that are reported as current. So a lot of times they'll have different medications listed from their providers as current. And so when we review those, we find those new medications and we have to send out a letter to clarify if the pilot is still using the medication. However, if they do bring documents to your office and you notice that they have some medications listed there as current that the applicant is no longer using, if you include a letter to us stating that the condition, what the condition was, and when the medication was discontinued, it eliminates us sending additional letters for clarification. Additionally, you only need to support submit reports when they're due in accordance with the authorization. So we see a lot of first-class pilots submitting reports every 6 months rather than every 12. So that does slow down our review overall on applications because we're looking at reports every 6 months versus every 12. And again, this is different for your antidepressant authorizations and drug and alcohol authorizations, which do require reports every 6 months. Just basic reminder on the Khaki statement. When you're using the standard Khaki terminology, Khaki qualified, not Khaki qualified, or has a current or previous SI, but is now Khaki qualified, that helps us make that determination on that particular condition very quickly. These Khaki conditions can have a wide variety of symptoms and severity. So if you determine that a pilot is not Khaki qualified, if you can give us the reasoning behind that determination, it really helps us pinpoint the right information to ask for. Oh, this reminder on prediabetes for the Khaki. So this is actually two different reminders, two different ends of the spectrum. If you have a pilot who is trying to do a Khaki for prediabetes and they've ever had an A1C of 6.5 or higher, you should follow the diabetes protocol. They don't qualify for Khaki. And then on the other end of that, if you have a pilot who has prediabetes, but they're not taking any medication, they're only managed by diet and exercise, you just need to state that. And if they're otherwise qualified, you can issue them. They don't require being on Khaki. This certification status summary, and you saw Dr. Frazier talk about some of these status summaries. These do contain just the pertinent information, but we do need it completed in its entirety. On this CHD and CAD recertification summary sheet in particular, we have noticed that sometimes the cardiologists are not including the LDL and the A1C. And so when we don't have that information, we will have to write back out and ask the pilot to gather that. So if you do see these, make sure the pilot has had their provider fill these out completely. All right. So document upload. You guys know that you, if as the AME of record for an applicant, can upload 25 documents. So that's 25 individual files per exam. They have to be 3 megabytes or less at this time. The applicable file types are PDF, doc, docx, JPEG, and XPS. When you upload those documents, you need to label them individually: lab reports, discharge summary. Large volume records should be broken down into the appropriate categories. Often we'll get 30 pages scanned into one file, and that does take us longer. We have to send it over and have it broken apart. So if you can break those apart into individual files, it does help out our review and the time that it takes to review those documents. And then just a reminder on the date for the documents, it would be the date of service. So the appointment date or the date of testing noted on that document. Next slide. Anytime you're having any difficulties with document upload or any other technical difficulties, you can contact our AMCS support desk. Here's their email address, phone number, and their website. There's a couple of resources here that are really helpful. Down towards the bottom of the page under document upload, there are 3 items there. There's the document types. That is a listing of all the different titles that you could add for the individual documents that you're uploading. There's also a PDF, which is a quick start guide. So if you like to have PDF that will take you step by step on how to do a document upload, that is available for you. And then also there is a video. This takes you to YouTube to see that video. It's about 15 minutes long. You guys probably are familiar with Jana Weems. She's the one actually doing this video, and it goes step by step over how to do the document upload. So if you have a staff member in your office who does document upload for you, those are great resources to go over and ensure that those are being uploaded correctly. All right, last slide. So that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank you guys for your time today. And again, thank you for the excellent work you're doing. We believe continued collaboration between the AMEs and our office will assist with being more precise in our request for information to the pilot. You're our first and direct line to the pilot during the exam. So the more details you can provide us on the application helps us be more efficient.
That will be the end of our presentation tonight. Thank you all for coming, and remember that it's in the chat. The address for sending your request for CME is ame-distance-training@fa.gov, and you need email. And if your full name was listed, so we can tell that you attended, we will send you a certificate. Dr. Wyrick, would you like to close it out for us?
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope this is beneficial for you, and it's part of Dr. Northrup's strategy of omnidirectional communication. And if nobody said thank you lately, let me be the first to say thank you. Thank you for being FAA medical examiners. Thank you for being our designees. Thank you for making the skies safer. Next time you look up in the sky and you see a contrail, you played a big role in that. Thank you so much, everyone.